Good Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to the Blue Water Climate Control Volquest.com podcast with Brent Hubbs, Rob Lewis, and Austin Price. Glad to have you along with us on this Wednesday as we continue our review of the Tennessee 2019 football season with a look ahead at 2020 and what the 2019 season means to the 2020 season. Again, we thank our friends at Blue Water Climate Control for their continued support of Volquest.com and the podcast that we're doing there. Guys, let's get into this Tennessee Chattanooga win. The Volunteers beat Chattanooga 45-0. This game is a runaway, Jesse, from the get-go. Tennessee was in complete control. What's your biggest takeaway from this win as it pertains to this team moving forward?
Well, as it pertains to this team moving forward, even though the competition was obviously not on the same level, and the fact that JG probably should have thrown an interception on the first play of the game, he looked miles ahead of the two guys behind him. And no, we have not seen Harrison Bailey, but I think, with the COVID-19 and the layoff and the lack of spring practice, the guy who Jeremy Pruitt trusts the most, who after this game was like, you guys in the media are giving yourself more credit than you deserve, and, we're not really worried about a quarterback battle, which is ironic because literally he benched him a week later. But that it's JG's is going to be the quarterback, and he made some plays in terms of moving around in the pocket in this game, which I think is something he needs to kind of find again in 2020, because a lot of times when he left that launch point was when he got himself into trouble. But in this game, he made some big throws, whether it was a throw to Tillman or kind of moving around and finding that touchdown to Juwan in the first half.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this game, you're right.
Story,
you talk
AP.
about the right off the bat, the first play of the game is a scripted play, a pass meant to be thrown to Juwan Jennings, and I've held on to this one for months. This was the frustration with the coaches early on last year. And it manifested itself even further once he freelanced at Alabama. He throws that deep ball go route to Callaway. Callaway was the decoy. He was not even. They repped that thing 50 times in practice. The ball goes to Juwan every time, and as you can watch on the television cut up, Juwan comes free. He's going to pick up at least 17 yards, if not maybe score, because he's got the angle on the guy defending him. So that's the frustration. He throws the deep ball. It almost gets picked off. Then they go down and score, nice 13-yard run by Ty Chandler. Tennessee, as Brent said, took this thing from the word go and played well. But it's easy, for a lot of the guys that don't necessarily normally factor to get up for Chattanooga. This isn't, Oklahoma. This isn't South Carolina or Missouri or whoever. I mean, it's a lesser opponent, and it's easy to get for these type games.
It's interesting, Rob, because I think if Jared throws the pick on the first play, you're not sure what's going to happen at that point. Does it change? Because as Jesse mentioned, a week later he's taken off the field. They make a change with Florida. You look at that opening drive, as Austin detailed, he threw it to the wrong guy, and then they didn't throw it again the rest of the drive. I mean, it was clearly like, okay, look, if you're not going to do what we say do, we'll just hand it off and we'll go get control of this game. Something they didn't do in week one, by the way, against Georgia State. They could do it in this Chattanooga game. But it is interesting. If that ball had been picked on the opening play, what Tennessee and what the coaching staff might have done there could have changed the course of how things played out this season, even though it still played out in an unusual fashion with the quarterback revolving door the way it did.
Yeah, and I think that if nothing else, and AP's story is great, but just the way that drive played out that you're talking about, I mean, it gave credence to something that we were, all of us were already thinking that, hey, Jeremy's not in love with Jared Guarantano, despite, the stories about coming over and having apple pie in January. I don't know if you left that game feeling, I don't think you necessarily felt like there was a quarterback controversy, but you left that game, I think, feeling like, he didn't exactly have an ironclad grip on the job.
No,
Yeah,
but I do think.
But he did go 7 of 8. No,
he went 7 of 8. He went 7 of 8 against Patsy, whereas Maurer, I think Mauer didn't complete a pass, and Trout was like 3 of 9. I mean, it can get worse, and I think that's kind of the takeaway is that again, JG, his ceiling perhaps is not as high as Harrison Bailey, or even those that are in the Tennessee fan base that really like Brian Mauer, but the floor is, and that's what I think this game showed, and I think that's why ultimately, Pruitt and the staff went back to JG time and again as this season unfolded, and why he is going to enter whenever this 2020 season happens, with I think a pretty firm grip on the job. I think the other takeaway, Hubs, is some guys flash. You continue to see the awareness and just natural ability of a guy like Toa Toa in this game. He knifes in the backfield for a big TFL, has a pass breakup. Kavaris Crouch made some plays off the edge. Darnell Wright, and this is something we could discuss. I mean, depending on what happens with the offensive line, Darnell Wright, flashed a little bit actually at guard. He did not play a ton of other guard the rest of this season, but you saw some young guys starting to kind of assert themselves in this game that actually had staying power, not the Jeremy Banks 2 interceptions, never hear from him again.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say Henry T, Jesse. That's what I had highlighted and made a little note of as I was watching through that. He really, starting like with the first defensive series of the game showed up. And, it's Chattanooga, yeah, but you can see, there's an 18-year-old kid that looks like an SEC linebacker.
Well, I think the biggest difference in some of these guys, and Jesse brings up Jeremy Banks. Jeremy Banks, that was self-inflicted. That wasn't a football thing where he didn't show up again. That was just self-inflicted because he makes stupid decisions. Whereas Shannon Reed, who led the team in tackles, that's the guy that steps up in this type of game, and you never hear from again.
Yeah, and you certainly have those cases in there. With that, I thought I want to go back to the Darnell Wright to guard in this game and K'Ron Calvert. Do you think there's a chance that that's a real look for Tennessee when they get back? I think they would have experimented with that maybe some in spring practice. Now that there's not a spring practice, do you think that they look at flip-flopping those guys, or do you think Darnell Wright is a tackle all the way for Tennessee with Calvert playing inside because of his physicality?
I think Tennessee really liked for certain what they saw from Calvert at right tackle. I think that was maybe one of the more pleasant surprises of the second half of the season. But don't you think that so much of that depends on what happens with Cade?
Yeah, if Cade is eligible, Austin, then that means it's Calvert and Darnell Wright battling out at right tackle, right?
Well, one would imagine. Obviously Cade played a little bit of everywhere at Georgia, so I guess there's some flexibility there. Trey wants to stay at guard. He doesn't want to bounce out anywhere. Where do they want to play Cade? Do they want to play him at guard, or do they want to just kind of have him, be that guy that, we just plug wherever, because he has been able to play at different spots. Obviously Wanye's the left tackle once he gets back, gets healthy. But you're right. If Cade is eligible, that's a great problem to have for Will Friend and Jim Chaney and the entire offensive staff of depth. Something they did not have 2 years ago, and it got better last year, but it would really improve if Cade's eligible this year.
Well, Carvin got some use at a name that we haven't mentioned yet. Jerome Carvin got some time in this game as a jumbo tight end, and I do think whoever's going to be the odd man out. Yeah, and whoever's going to be the odd man out, and Locklear is another good example of that. Whoever's not going to be in that starting five, I think, with the concern around who's going to also line up at tight end with Austin Pope, I think you may see more jumbo packages this fall for Tennessee. Now, you obviously are likely to be more predictable, but not necessarily. You can max protect some out of those looks. You don't necessarily have to run. You just keep an extra guy in there to block. But, if there's not confidence at Princeton Fan or Jacob Warren or whoever can hold up in the run game, and you saw a lot in this game as well, how much they continue to run behind 81, you're going to need two, though. Dominic Wood-Anderson was actually pretty good in this game. And so, I think a jumbo tight end for whoever, whether it's Cade, Carvin, Locklear, whoever doesn't make the starting lineup, could be an interesting spot for some guys to get some playing time.
Well, I tell you what, I think it's a real possibility this fall. And of course, you're forecasting here, so 100 different scenarios could happen. But for a guy like Locklear, but more specifically for a guy like Jerome Carvin, who realistically probably should have redshirted 2 years ago. If Cade is eligible, and you feel, and you've got Locklear as a backup at guard, and you've got, other guys that can play center, and obviously you've got some flexibility at tackle with 3 bodies there, not counting Cade, who can flex out and play tackle some. I think Jerome Carvin's a perfect candidate for four games and done. Redshirt him, keep him around. That just makes a ton of sense to me if Tennessee is at full strength along the offensive line.
It certainly feels like the right side of that offensive line has got, I don't want to say a log jam, but there's a lot of bodies there that can do a lot of different things. When you talk about Locklear, you talk about Cade if he's eligible, you're talking about Carvin, you're talking about Darnell Wright. I mean, those are 4 guys who have played significant amounts of football, significant snaps of football for you on the right side, who are going to be battling for 2 spots. So that's going to be an interesting competition, a competition that's limited by the fact that this team did not have 15 practices this spring, but is a good situation for Tennessee to be in, and is a situation where it's okay that they didn't have practices this spring there because they've got enough bodies to find 2 out of that 4 that you feel comfortable with. Where you don't have that situation is necessarily inside linebacker. Daniel Petulli only had 2 tackles in this game, but upon rewatch, it was clear how much he was lining people up and making the adjustments in this game. I know the commentators talked about it, but every time you watched, he's the one who's walking up and down the defensive line, Jesse. He's turning and talking to the safeties. This is where this defense started to really marry itself together, front end to back end, when Petulli returned to the field this week, even though the competition wasn't very good.
Yeah, and you saw kind of the same thing from McCullough in the second half, I thought. McCullough was lining up a lot of the younger guys, which, teased a little bit about his role later on. But you're right. I mean, who's going to line up next to him now this next fall? That's one of the biggest, unknowns. Is it going to be J.J. Peterson? Where does Quavaris Crouch, who Crouch actually made some plays in this game, actually with his hand in the dirt, not even as a stand-up guy, but was almost playing like a true defensive end. Now, he ran out of the rush lane a couple of times, too, and kind of showcases inexperience there. But, no, Shannon Reed's not on the roster anymore. This was effectively the end of Will Ignont. He picks up a personal foul in this game, got benched, and then was not on the travel roster a week later at Florida. So, yeah, I mean, it's another, I think, just kind of overarching takeaway, Hubs, from this game, which is kind of funny to even say, but when you rewatch it, the defensive line did not actually showcase very well, in my opinion. They didn't make a lot of plays. I thought it was the Petulli and Toa, and even, again, Shannon Reed led the team in tackles, but I thought those guys were kind of the leaders on the group. And for this unit to not even showcase that well against a, FCS team, but for them to then become a formidable group, not a dominant group, but a serviceable to formidable group late in the season against the SEC team is kind of remarkable, because that was not the case the first, couple weeks of the season.
Jesse, that's probably what jumped out the most to me about this game was how much better that group got as year. I mean, Chattanooga had 150 yards rushing in the game, which, you go back to the end of the year. I mean, by the time we got to November, December, SEC teams weren't getting 150 yards against this group. And I'm with you totally. They, there's not maybe not a ton of NFL guys up there, but they and give Tracy Rocker credit for developing those guys. They improved so much from this game from September, and the Georgia State game gave up over 200 yards on the ground, gave up 150 yards to Chattanooga. Look at those numbers, and for what they did against Missouri, Kentucky to end the year and really seal some wins. I mean, those guys really improved dramatically.
I thought there were a couple of instances where a guy like Kayvon Bennett got off the edge and was just a hair from either a strip sack or being able to get there. And I thought the quarterback for Chattanooga on a couple of different instances specifically, stepped up, was able to make a play with his legs. Now that's lost contain, at the in the mid level, but at the same time, they showed flashes to me. Granted, they got gashed on the ground, but as far as trying to get to the quarterback, a guy like Kayvon Bennett started, I thought showed in this game he was getting closer and closer, and as the season went along, he did get better and better.
Look, I'm with you, Austin. Looking back on it, if you look at the first 3 games, and you didn't see it at the time because Tennessee lost those first 2 games, and everybody's talking about 1-8 or 1-6 or whatever it is. But you look and you see a guy like Kayvon Bennett, Jesse, who's making you see a little more progress with him, kind of week to week. But you don't see that kind of progress really with a guy like Trayvon Flowers, who I thought struggled all the first 3 weeks of the season, didn't play particularly well. There's a book you can tell getting out on Warren Burrell here the last couple of weeks. I mean, Chattanooga couldn't, their quarterback couldn't throw the football, but the slant he had a hard time handling. I didn't think Burrell was physical in this game, in the run game, getting off blocks to kind of hold the edge a little bit. So it's interesting knowing how the season ends to see kind of who's starting to emerge a little bit and who's not emerging. And those are 3 guys that jumped out to me. Bennett going the right way, but Burrell and Flowers not necessarily going the right direction.
The irony is Bennett didn't even play. He played, he made an impact, but on minimal snaps. He played less than 10 snaps in this game, looking it up, on some of the other notes. But I agree with the Burrell point. Kenneth George got a ton of run in this game because Alante was effectively benched after what happened at the end of BYU, which was notable. The other guy that flashed, and again, we'll see what kind of jump can he make in 2020. We know that Tennessee needs pass rush help opposite of Kayvon Bennett. I mentioned Crouch, but Roman Harrison got a lot of playing time in this game. He's kind of the Tasmanian devil. He's just kind of out there running around wild. Where does he fit? I think that's still a huge unknown, not only for us, I mean, for the coaches. I think the staff is still trying to grapple with, where do we play Roman Harrison? He's not overly long. Can he be a kind of, I'm not saying he's going to be this, guys, but can he be kind of like an Elvis Dumerville type guy who's a shorter arm, but quick twitch guy off the edge because he doesn't have the length that's kind of prototypical out there? He's going to be one of the more interesting guys to follow once training camp happens because, he played a decent amount in this game, saw some more time in Florida, and then his playing time seemed to kind of wane depending on the week. Can he become kind of a consistent extra guy in that, outside linebacker rotation, or do they decide to play him inside? I don't know. I think that's a big question mark.
Yeah, and Austin, I think another question mark is back on the offensive side of the ball. How does Jay Graham manage that running back rotation? Okay, because let's assume everybody comes back at this point, but because of there's no spring practice and guys maybe don't have the opportunity to transfer some of the things that they thought they would do. So how does he manage Chandler, Jordan, and Gray? In this game, there was more Jordan than we had seen in previous games. There was a little bit less Gray in terms of the number of carries he got. Chandler with 10 carries in his game. I think that rotation, how much does Jay want to rotate, what they do at that running back position? Because to me, in the first part of the season, they were kind of grasping at straws to figure out what that rotation was.
Well, because, obviously you go back, Ty shows flashes the first few weeks, but, they're trying to work Tim Jordan in. Gray showed flash the first, 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden in this game starts to disappear more and would really just be invisible, for the next, 6 or 7 games for the most part. So, you're right. I think for Jay, I think looking at his history, he likes guys that can slash. So that lends itself to me to be, 3 and 8. And we'll see what they do when they need a bigger back. Do they give Crouch that role still? Can Tim Jordan find a niche? I'm hearing he's up, right around 220 pounds right now, which is, a nice jump for him. And then, what do any of these freshmen, the bigger backs, whether it be T. Hodge or any of those guys, can they come in and find a niche as the big back in short yardage situations?
Rob, here's a crazy thought. What about Tim Jordan with a little H-back work? If he gets 225, 230, I mean, he's a pretty physical guy in terms of pass protection. Could you find a little bit of help there, not as a true tight end, but could you play him a little H-back there and get kind of that 2 tight end set, with the possibility if he gets a little bit bigger. I think that's something that could be worth watching
Yeah,
as
I don't
well.
think that's out of the question at all. And it's more, I think that's more a reflection of where Tennessee is at the tight end position than about Jordan. And just as we've talked about a lot, behind Austin Pope, you don't know what you've got. So I certainly, AP's been on here, and I don't disagree, advocating for Jameer Johnson to be a jumbo tight end. That kind of tells you where Tennessee is at with that, blocking tight end, H-back, whatever the 11th guy is. So,
well, it's also just a huge blow that Sean Brown and those guys that, Jackson Lowe, they didn't even get to go through spring this year. They needed to have the big step in spring, and now, they're going into fall camp, with where they were last year as far as on-field production, as far as experience.
Yeah, I agree. Of all the positions on the field there and the wide receiver, I think it's a level playing field for everybody in college football. But for Tennessee, tight end, wide receiver were two spots that you really do just, I think, sort some things out in spring ball.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right at that position. You could say inside linebacker, but Crouch wasn't going to be there anyway. Maybe safety there, but I think offensively, when you look at everything, who your bodies are that you're going to line up with at wide receiver. Okay, you don't know, Jesse, who the bodies are at tight end. Outside of Austin Pope, you're just not sure of anybody back behind him. So you got to get creative there, and not having the 15 or not having the days this spring. That's probably the biggest detriment for Jim Chaney's development, aside from, I guess, maybe getting Harrison Bailey just the work that he needed. But in terms of this team for this fall, the shortcomings at tight end, not getting their work this spring, might be the biggest disappointment for them on offense.
Yeah, outside, I agree with the fact that they have a handle on at least who the receivers are probably going to be, and considering some of those guys were not going to be here for spring practice because they're going to have to count on some freshmen. They weren't missing a stuff there. Now, how much time they miss as we continue to go on, I do think that's a group that needs to build some chemistry with JG. But there's no question that tight end is the single biggest question mark, just in terms of unknowns, bodies, who's even going to be in the mix, heading into 2020 on offense. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. One of the funniest plays from this game was Brandon Kennedy's just hilarious, egregious hold, literally right in front of the referee, that the referee missed when Kennedy got beat and started two-hand grabbing the guy's shirt. That was among one of the funnier plays of the season. A week ago we had the BYU guy throwing Jarrett Garantano's shoe, and then this week we got Kennedy getting beat so badly he's getting dragged like he's about to go sledding or skiing, and the referee just completely missed it. That was a pretty funny play.
In a stunning development, an SEC official missed something pretty blatant that happened right in front of them, right?
Yeah,
it happens. For Tennessee, as we wrap it up here, this game, a feel-good game, maybe. You win easily, exercise some ghosts, kind of get the monkey off your back a little bit, that type of thing. But I do think when you put it in the context of knowing how the rest of the season plays out, this was an important game for some guys. Kenneth George, this was a big game for him. I think there were some guys on this team, Kayron Calvert getting the reps he got and getting some confidence from this. I do think while it's a 45-0, yeah, okay, whatever, non-competitive game, for some individuals, there was some real positives that came out of this game that show up later in the season for this team.
Nigel Warrior, the one that jumps out for me.
Makes the interception, made a football play, right, Rob?
A week after he, had a heavy hand in the last minute meltdown against BYU. I'm not saying that having an interception against Chattanooga is a huge thing, but I don't think after the BYU game any of us thought that he was going to be a first team All SEC safety, and I think you kind of see him start to turn the corner a little bit against Chattanooga.
And the last thing for me, Austin, when you look at this, is we get this question all the time. You get why Jeremy Pruitt wants Jeremy Banks back on his football team. Okay,
he's a football player.
Yeah, he didn't know what he was doing in this game. Still, he was athletically better than his competition and made plays. He is good enough as a football player to help this program somewhere if he can get back on this team whenever this team reconvenes. You understand that why when you rewatch this game, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, he's still super green, super inexperienced, just a guy that, is really raw in a lot of aspects, especially playing on the defensive side of the ball. But, talent does take over, and he's got a nose for the ball. He's got some instincts, and for Jeremy Banks, you more than anything, you just hope the kid's kind of, figured things out in his own life. And if that results in him coming back and then playing at Tennessee again, that's big for Tennessee and big for Jeremy. And if not, then you just hope he kind of, keeps his nose clean and continues to go to school.
Yeah, want to say quickly to our friends at Blue Water Climate Control, thanks again for your support of the podcast. And for those out there in need of any kind of servicing for their air conditioning or heating unit, as we bounce back and forth this time of year, air conditioned one day, heating the next day, please check out our friends at Blue Water Climate Control. They can work on your system from an allergy standpoint to help you there. They also have the smooth sailing service plan. You can contact them and get more information about that. It's a great plan that gives you all kinds of options to help you prepare for later on down the road if you need to replace your unit, but also you get a discount on any repair that you have to do. You get your semi-annual checkups for your system, as well as access and no overtime fees for weekend and after-hour emergencies. That's the smooth sailing plan that is taking place at Blue Water Climate Control. Check them out at 865-299-2290, or you can visit them online at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com. They're also on Twitter at BlueH2O_climate. That's Blue Water Climate Control. For Austin Price, Rob Lewis, and Jesse Simonton, I'm Brent Hubbs. That's going to do it for this look back at the Chattanooga game and what it meant for the rest of the season and what it means for next year for this Tennessee football team. Next week, we'll tackle into the gauntlet that is the SEC for this Tennessee football team. But that does it for this edition of the podcast. Don't forget, we'll have the mailbag edition on Friday. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day, everybody.